Chapter 10. Infection. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky. You can die from someone else's misery. Emotional states are infectious as diseases. You may feel you are helping the drowning man, but you are only perpetuating your own disaster. The unfortunate sometimes draws misfortune on themselves. They will also draw it on you, as associate with the happy and fortunate instead. Born in Limerick, Ireland in 1818, Marie Gilbert came to Paris in the 1840s to make her fortune as a dancer and a performer. Taking the name of Lola Montez, her mother was of distant Spanish descent. She claimed to be a flamenco dancer from Spain. By 1845, her career was languishing, and to survive, she became a courtesan, quickly one of the most successful in Paris. Only one man could salvage Lola's dancing career, Alexander Dejar, owner of the newspaper with the largest circulation in France, and also the newspaper's dramatic critic. She decided to woo and conquer him. Investigating his habits, she discovered that when he went riding every morning, an excellent horseman herself, she rode out one morning and accidentally ran into him. Soon they were riding together every day. A few weeks later, Lola moved into his apartment. For a while, the two were happy together, when Dejar helped Lola to revive her dancing career. Despite the risk of social standing, Dejar told friends he would marry her. In the spring, Lola had not told him that she had eloped at age 19 with an Englishman and was still legally married. Although Dejar was deeply in love, his life started to slide downhill. His fortunes in business changed, and influential friends began to avoid him. One night, Dejar was invited to a party attended by some of the wealthiest young men in Paris. Lola wanted to go too, but he would not allow it. They had their first quarrel. Dejar attended the party by himself. There, hopelessly drunk, he insulted an influential dramatic critic. Critic had said about Lola. The following morning, Babylon challenged him to a duel. Babylon was one of the best pistol shots in France. Dejar tried to apologize, but the duel took place, and he was shot and killed. Thus ended the life of the most promising young man of Paris society. Devastated, Lola left Paris. In 1846, Lola found herself in Munich, where she decided to woo and conquer King Ludwig of Bavaria. The best way to Ludwig, she discovered, was through his aide-de-camp, Count Otto von Richburg, a man with a fondness of pretty girls. One day, when the Count was breakfasting at an outdoor cafe, Lola rode by on her horse, was accidentally thrown from the saddle, and landed near his feet. The Count rushed to help her and was enchanted. He promised to introduce her to Ludwig. Richburg arranged an audience with the king for Lola, but when she arrived in the anteroom, she could hear the king saying he was too busy to meet a favor-seeking stranger. Lola pushed aside the sentries and entered his room anyway. In the process of the front of her dress somehow got torn, perhaps by her, perhaps by one of the sentries. And to the astonishment of all, most especially the king, her bare breasts were brazenly exposed. Lola was granted her audience with Ludwig. 55 hours later, she made her debut on his stage. The reviews were terrible, but this did not stop Lola from arranging the more performances. Ludwig, in his own words, bewitched by Lola, he started to appear in public with her on his arm, and then he bought a furnished apartment for her on one of Munich's most favorable boulevards. Although he had been known as a miser and was not given to flight of fancy, he started to shower Lola with gifts and to write poetry for her. Now, his favorite mistress, she capitulated to fame and fortune overnight. Lola began to lose her sense of proportion one day. when she was out riding, an elderly man rode ahead of her, a bit too slowly for her liking. Unable to pass him, she began to splash him with riding crop. On another occasion, she took her dog, unleashed, for a stroll. The dog attacked a passerby, but instead of helping the man get the dog away, she whipped him with the leash. Incidents like this infuriated the citizens of that town, but Luke stood by Lola, even had her naturalized as a citizen. The king's entourage tried to wake him to the dangers of the affair, but those who criticized Lola were fired. While there, who had loved their king, now outwardly disrespected him. Lola was a countess, had a new palace built for herself, and began to dabble in politics, acting on policy. She was the most powerful force in the kingdom. Her influence on the king's cabinet continued to grow, and she treated the others with disdain. As a result, riots broke out throughout the realm. A once peaceful land was virtually in the grip of civil war, and students everywhere was chanting, "Ras mi Lola." By February of 1849, Ludwig was finally unable to withstand the pressure. With great sadness, he ordered Lola to leave immediately. She left, but not until she was paid off. For the first 5 months, wrath was turned against their formerly beloved king. In March of that year, he was forced to abdicate. Lola Montez moved to England. More than anything, she needed respectable, and despite being married, she still had not arranged a divorce from the Englishman she had wed years before. She set her sights on George Strafford Hurd, a promising young army officer who was son of a influential barrister. Although he was 10 years younger than Lola and could have chosen a wife among the prettiest and wealthiest young girls of English society, he fell under her spell. They were married in 1849. Soon arrested on the charge of bigamy, she skipped bail and hell made their way to Spain. They quarreled horribly and on one occasion, Lola splashed him with a knife. Finally, she drove him away, returning to England. He found he had lost his position in the army. Ostracized from England's society, he moved to Portugal, where he lived in poverty. After a few months, his life ended in a boating accident. A few years later, the man who published Lola's montage autobiography was bankrupt. In 1853, Lola moved to California, where she met and married a man named Pat Hull. Their relationship was as stormy as all the others, and she left Hull for another man. He took to drink and fell into a deep depression that lasted until he died. 4 years later, still a relatively young man. At the age of 41, Lola gave away her clothes and finery and turned to God. She toured America lecturing on religious topics, dressed in white and wearing a halo-like white headgear. She died 2 years later in 1861. Lola attracted men with her wiles, but her power over them went beyond the sexual. It was though the force of her character that she kept her lovers enthralled. Men were suckered into her maelstrom, and she churned up around them. They felt confused, upset, but the strength of the emotion she stirred also made them feel more alive. As is often the case with infection, the problems would only arrive over time. Lola's inherent instability would begin to get under her lover's skin. They would find themselves drawn into her problems, but their emotional attachment to her would make them want to help her. This was crucial point of the disease. For Lola, Montaz could not be helped. Her problems were too deep. One of her lovers identified with them. He was okay. Once the lover identified with them, he was lost. He would find himself embroiled in quarrels. The infection would spread to family, friends, or the case of Louis, the entire nation. The only solution would be to cut her off or suffer an suffer an eventual collapse. The infecting character type is not restricted to women. It has nothing to do with gender. It stems from an inward inability to radiate outward, drawing disaster upon itself. There is almost a desire to destroy and upsettle. You can spend a lifetime studying the pathology of infecting characters. You could spend a lifetime studying the pathology of it, but don't waste your time. Just learn the lesson. When you suspect you are in the presence of an infector, don't argue, don't try to help, don't pass the person on to your friends, or you will become enmeshed. Flee the infector's presence or suffer the consequences. Cassius has a lean, hungry look. He thinks too much. I don't know the man. I should avoid so soon as to spare Cassius. Such men as to be never at heart's ease while they behold a greater than themselves and therefore very dangerous. William Shakespeare. Those misfortunes among us who have been brought down by circumstances beyond their control deserve all the help and sympathy we can give them. But there are others who are not born to misfortune, unhappiness, but who draw it upon themselves by their destructive actions and unsettling effect on others. It would be a great thing if we could raise them up, change their patterns, but more than not, it's their patterns that end up getting inside and changing us. The reason is simple. Humans are extremely susceptible to the moods and emotions and even the ways of thinking of those with whom they spend their time. The incurably unhappy and unstable have a particularly strong infect power because their character and emotions are so intense. They often present themselves as victims, making it difficult at first to see their miseries and self-inflicted. Before you realize the real nature of the problem, you have been infected by them. Understand this. In this game of power, the people you associate with are critical. The risk of associating with infectors is that you will waste valuable time and energy trying to free yourself. Through a kind of guilt by association, you will also suffer in the eyes of others. Never underestimate the dangers of infection. There are many kinds of infectors to be aware of, but one of the most insidious is the sufferer from chronic dissatisfaction. Cassius, the Roman conspirator against Julius Caesar, had the discontent that comes from deep envy. He simply could not endure the presence of anyone greater talent. Probably because Caesar sensed the man's interminable sourness, he passed him up for the position of first praetorship and gave the position to Brutus instead. Cassius brooded and brooded, his hatred for Caesar becoming pathological. Brutus himself, a devoted Republican, disliked Caesar's dictatorship. Had he had the patience to wait, he would have become the first man in Rome after Caesar's death and could have undone the evil that the leader had wrought. But Cassius infected him with his own rancor, bending his ear daily with tales of Caesar's evil. He finally won Brutus over to the conspiracy. It was the beginning of a great tragedy. How many misfortunes could have been avoided had brothers learned to fear the power of infection? There is also one solution to infectious quarantine. By the time you recognize the problem, it is often too late. A Lola Montage overwhelms you with her forceful personality. Cassius intrigues you with in his confiding nature and the depths of his feelings. How can you protect yourself against such insidious viruses? The answer lies in judging people on the effects they have on the world and not on the reasons they give you for the problem. A virus, unseen it. Infectors can be recognized by misfortune they draw on themselves. Their turbulence, their past long line of broken relationships, their unstable careers, the very force of their character which sweeps you up and makes you lose your reason. Be forewarned by the signs of infections. Learn to see the discontent in their eyes. Most important of all, do not take pity. Do not enmesh yourself trying to help. The infector will remain unchanged, but you will be unhinged. The other side of the infection is equally valid and perhaps more readily understood. There are people who attract happiness to themselves by their good cheer, nature, buoyancy, and intelligence, and they are a source of pleasure, and you must associate with them to share with the prosperity they draw upon themselves. This applies to more than good cheer and success. All positive qualities can infect us. Tyron had many strange and intimidating traits, but most agreed that he surpassed all Frenchmen in graciousness and aristocrat charm and wit. Indeed, he came from one of the oldest noble families in the country, and despite his belief in democracy and the French Republic, he retained his courtly manners. His contemporary Napoleon was in many ways the opposite, a peasant from Corsica, taciturn and ungracious, even violent. There was no one Napoleon admired more than Tyranny. He envied his ministry's ways with people, his wit, his ability to charm women, and at best he kept Tyrolean around him, hoping to soak up the culture he lacked. There is no doubt that Napoleon changed as his rule continued. Many of the rough edges were smoothed by the constant association with Tyranny, using the positive side of the emotion, osmosis, to advantage. If, for example, you are miserably by nature, you will never go beyond a certain limit. Only generous souls attain greatness. Associate with the generous then, and they will infect you, opening up everything that is tight and restricted in you. If you are gloomy, gravitate to cheerful. If you are prone to isolation, force yourself to befriend and gregarious. Never associate with those who share your defects. They will reinforce everything that holds you back. Only create associations with positive affinities. Make this a rule and of life, and you will benefit more than from all the therapy in the world. Recognize the fortune so that you may choose their company, and the unfortunate so that you may avoid them. Misfortune is usually the crime of folly, and among those who suffer from it, there is no malady more contagious. Never open your door to the least of misfortune, for If you do, many others will follow in that train. Do not die another's misery. This law admits of no reversal. Its application is universal. There is nothing to be gained by associating with those who infect you with their misery. There is only power and good fortune to be obtained by associating with the fortunate. Ignore this law at your peril.